Thank you, Kevin. Thank you, everybody. Kevin, it's really great to celebrate 40 years of PPS, right? It's been a long building history. You are the center of this community, and you allow all of us to share ideas and to understand better how pricing works and how we could do pricing better. As a matter of fact, pricing is quite a complex and elaborate topic. The more we spend time on it, the more we see that we have things to learn. If you look at the presentations this morning, there are some common themes from Joanne and Sonia's, but there's also a lot of stories that are very different about different businesses and what we call different games. Think about the cookie story, which is a game of consumers and pricing at the right level with what are the alternatives, which is quite different from the B2B game that we talked about later. And so the theme of the book is one that goes into the details and try to lay out how pricing is a little bit like a ball sport. You don't have anything like a universal ball sport. You have basketball, you have baseball, you have soccer, you have rugby, you have many ball sports, and they all have different rules, different methods, different types of coaching, different shapes of players and physicality. They all are different from each other, and if you want to win in any of these sports, you need to really understand deeply how they work. And I believe that in pricing you have something similar. While there are some principles that are common, there's also a deep understanding of each game that is needed. And when you understand your game really well, you can also understand potentially how you can change the game. So what I'd like to do today is introduce you a little bit more to this framework that the video introduces. Very modestly, we think we could change the world, but practically we called it Game Changer because we think it's a book and it's a set of ideas that help you change your particular game and go from one of the 7 games to one other, depending on your market characteristics. So today I'll talk about why I think we need a unified theory of pricing. We'll talk about the framework and the different games, and then we'll talk about how you can apply the games to change the outcomes for your business, outcomes for your market, outcomes potentially for even society. So I've been doing pricing for now quite a lot of years, almost 30 years, and let me start at the beginning. I started to do pricing a bit randomly when I was working at Shell, and the guy who was sharing my office was in charge of pricing. He was an old guy, well, he had my age, basically. And he was repricing every day, every service station in France. And he was starting at 8 a.m. in the morning. He was looking at the prices that were coming back up from the field about the competitive stations, the set of stations that were right around it, and then he was defining the price for every station that were going to be the prices for the next morning. And when we looked at this, it was obvious there were a set of opportunities. He had some heuristics and he knew really well each of the stations, but he was doing it just by his knowledge of all the 1,800 stations in France, which is a lot of different stations, and the competitive set varies constantly. So what we started to do together, I was just coming out of engineering schools and I loved math, so I started to help him out. And we defined a model about how the elasticity varied station by station. And of course, when you have a station that is right in front of another service station, it's a very different situation from when you are in a rural environment on a small road and the next station is 10 miles away, or when you are on a highway and the next station is 40 miles away, or whether you are in the middle of the streets and there's a lot of traffic and you can't move very much. In Paris in particular, like, being 1 mile away is being an hour away from the next station, right? And therefore, the elasticity of each of these stations is very different. So we developed a model that could predict elasticity based on essentially what we observed over time and the price experiments we were doing, and then some environmental factors that we knew about each of these stations. And what we found is when you can predict elasticity and then price to elasticity, you can actually improve outcome in a massive way. We improve the margins in fuel are very thin, but we improve these margins by 40% in a year and a half of working there. So it was really a game of elasticity, and that was my first foray into pricing. as a pricer and as a practitioner. It's also a very dear moment for me because this is the time when I met my wife, and that's the picture that you have on the left. We wanted to sail away and not stay in France. She basically said that she couldn't live in Paris, and I said, well, I can't work in France outside Paris. So with that discussion, it was decided that we were going to live abroad. And we sailed away to first America and then California. My second foray in pricing was almost 10 years later, and you could see the results of, and we're still married, by the way, so the little two kids are there now. They are more than 20 and running around doing their own stuff. But it was when I started to work on pricing hard drives. And like I had learned and applied the economic framework, I would try to find out what the elasticity was for hard drives in different situations. We tried to segment the market one way or the other. After 3 weeks, I could not find any correlation whatsoever. There was apparently no price elasticity. You could have price go up even when the volumes were going up, and vice versa. There was absolutely no correlation. When we, my wife at that time was at UC Berkeley, and she was doing game theory classes, and I started to read the books from Neil Buff and others, and realized that the answer had nothing to do with elasticity. And the answer in a market which is very concentrated, with 3 to 4 hard drive manufacturers and around 10 buyers, but 3 or 4 that are really big. Think about HP, Compaq at the time, Dell, Apple, and a few others. The elasticity plays out in a very different way. The price that is the outcome of the transaction depends mostly on how your competitor prices. And it's a repeated game. It's negotiation after negotiation. Every quarter, everybody negotiates with each of the 10 largest players. And that's how the price is determined quarter after quarter for every single one of the customers, for every single one of the drives. That's a game that has nothing to do with elasticity. It's a game that has everything to do with game theory. So that's a second pricing game. But then later on, I worked for Intuit. And Intuit is a software company that sells QuickBooks. I suppose many of you know this. And they have a lineup of products from the good, better, best. Here there's 5 products at different levels. And just right by the time we started to, and this is in 2006, we're starting to do work for them, Microsoft comes out on the right with an offer that is free online Accounting Express. The free online Accounting Express basically means that from a feature-to-feature comparison, this is comparable to the middle gray bar you have on the left side. That means that if we wanted with Intuit to match the free offers, that means the middle gray bar will go to 0 and 0 revenues. Everything on the right goes to 0, and you can imagine the price pressure on the left. The areas of all these gray rectangles would be divided by 3 or 4. The revenues would go down from 1 billion to potentially $200 million. At that time, it was a very stressful time for everybody. And Brad Smith, who was the CEO of that business at the time, said something really smart that I appreciated a lot. He came to us and he said, guys, I know this is an existential threat. We've seen what Microsoft can do to businesses that are much smaller where they can enter. They have decided to enter our market decisively. If we don't respond right, we probably will die. Someone else will buy us, but will not survive with the kind of revenues we have. Now, in face of that threat, I want you to think completely freely about the answer. And if the answer is that we need to go free one way or the other in order to survive, so be it. Tell us what we should do and what product, if we should go free, we should go free. Now, the main answer that you think about when you're a product manager and your competitor comes up with a set of a product with features that match yours, that is free, is you're trying to match feature per feature. But is that the right answer? When we looked at it, people who would be most attracted by a free accounting software were not the established restaurant owner that has her business for 10 years, that has a relationship with an accountant, and that has roughly 1 million to 1.5 million of revenues and turnover for the year. She's not going to switch to save $200 for QuickBooks accounting. So she buys QuickBooks Pro, but she's not at risk to switch to Microsoft. Now, who is at risk to switch to Microsoft? The startup. The guys who don't even know they have a business. They don't want to spend anything because they don't know if they're going to have revenues. And in that situation, they are the real segment that is at risk to move away. Now, if you look at the lineup that we just had before, there was a product that didn't have the same features as Microsoft, but that was targeting exactly that segment. That product was called Simple Start. It was a product that had been designed by Intuit to serve really small companies that are starting and to give them a ramp into the ecosystem. We made that product free. And we worked really hard on making the added features discoverable so that customers could discover when they need more than the simple features that are in Simple Start. They could go to the paid version, which hopefully is only when they have revenues and therefore where they can afford to pay $200. And when you start to have a business, $200 for accounting is not that much. What we found is 3 years later, Microsoft abandoned the accounting software, and Intuit has continued to grow since then, and the QuickBooks ecosystem is now more than 3 billion. The right answer here had nothing to do with elasticity and had nothing to do with game theory. It was all about understanding who the customer is that is in competition between us and the competition, and what's the value and what can we do for them. It was, again, a completely different game. And so facing with this, we've all been in different places, but I just wanted to try to illustrate that how the game of pricing can be played very differently in different circumstances. And how do we step back and understand and find a framework to connect all of the different pricing theories, whether this is elasticity, whether this is game theory, whether this is the world of personalization and adapting to your customers and what they want. That's what I'm going to talk about now. So if you think about pricing, what do you need to think about? You need to think about your costs, you need to think about your customers, you need to think about value, you need to think about competitor prices, but that's not all. You need to think about your margin, your elasticity. I talked about it, discrimination, do you want to discriminate or not, differentiation of products. There's a lot of other things you could think about. But even when you think about that, all of you are already thinking about other things. Well, how about promotions and fees and bundling, unbundling, rebates? There's all sorts of pricing mechanisms that you need to think about that can play out in a different way. And once you've thought about this, you need to start to think about a number of other things like your trade spend and your ROI and how you negotiate and your capacity and the CPQ and the process and the organization and all of this. You have a lot of things you need to think about, and I'm sure you all can double the number of words that is in this page, right? But they are not all completely separate. There's 3 spaces. There's the spaces of cost, there's the spaces of customer value, and there's spaces about what our competitors are doing. And when you look together, these spaces actually can fit into some intersections. That's the framework that you've seen in the video. Elasticity is really at the intersection of cost and value. In order to determine your price based on elasticity, you need to know how the demand curve varies, how your demand will vary when you vary your prices. You also need to know your costs. But think about this, in the elasticity framework, you never look at what your competitors are doing. You just know that if you have competitors that are very aggressive, your elasticity is going to be higher, but you can't really quantify. Elasticity assumes a fixed position of your competition. And then you need to think about how it works out, but elasticity is the intersection of cost and value. Game theory, similarly, if you think about it, is at the intersection of cost and competitor prices. So game theory is all about how when I move my prices and when my competitor moves their prices, how will our profit vary? It usually doesn't talk about value. And then differentiation and behavioral science is similarly at the intersection of value versus competitor. To understand how to drive customer behaviors like we did with Intuit, you need to combine the understanding about the value customers have and the behavior that also competitors have, and that's how it comes together. And then once in a while, you can have data about your costs, what the customers value, and what the competitors are doing all the time, and you have the supply-demand framework that in theory we'll all like to apply, but very practically we don't always have all the data to do supply-demand. Now there's some markets where we have supply-demand, and that's the middle and what we call the dynamic pricing. So you have essentially with this Venn diagram 7 different situations you can find themselves depending on the information you have about how to make pricing decisions. Do they correspond to different types of markets? Well, we talked about elasticity, game theory, and behavioral science already. Let me talk about value. We all want and advise everybody who asks us about pricing that pricing to value is really important. Some companies can do this really well. Bloomberg is an example of that. I'll talk later about Apple, but there's a number of examples of people who can price about value. You can price really with value if you have a very differentiated value proposition, and you have that proposition that is so differentiated that you don't have that much competition. At that point, you really think uniquely about your customers. You forget about your cost. Your competitors don't really matter, and you price only based on the value you can have. The game is anchoring about that value, convincing your customers about how to think about the value you bring for them, and finding a price that aligns with that value. We talked about the elasticity game, which is the service stations, which is the combination, and so I won't go further, but it's a very different game than the value game. You don't price gas station to value, except in some circumstances if you are the station in Yosemite, and you arrive at Yosemite with no more gas, and you have no choice. Happened to me once. I was happy to pay a really high price. On the left is the world of cost plus. And what I mean by this is sometimes you have to price cost plus if you have no choice. And if you have no choice, basically, if your products are completely undifferentiated, if the costs vary customer by customer, and if the customers are really powerful and you're very small and there's a lot of competition that is ready to do whatever you can do. Construction business is an example of that. Not necessarily large projects building a bridge, but small constructions of houses and so on, and plumbers and all of that. You can find ways to escape to the other side, but when there are many alternatives and no differentiation, and you have large customers, they tend to push you to the cost plus approach. We talked about hard disk drives. The game theory aspect really applies when you have very few customers and very few competitors, and game theory is the way to decide on pricing. So what happens at the bottom here? Well, the truck business is a really good example. Every truck on the road in America is different from each other. Not sure whether you guys knew it, but even the trucks on highway have been customized so much to the trips they make and to the fleet that is managing them. And then when you go to all the special trucks, dump trucks and all that, they're all different from each other. And they're priced in a way which is a negotiation with each of the customers. There's a few truck manufacturers, and every truck manufacturer will negotiate each deal through the dealers to match the competition so that they will win the deal the best way possible. Very different from all the other things that we talked about. And I talked about earlier about behavioral science and the Intuit story. In the middle, nobody will be surprised that airlines are pricing in the middle. That's the world of supply, demand, balance, and dynamic pricing. I believe all these games are very different from each other, and understanding how to win in each game and whether or not you can move from one game to another is the theme that I'm going to talk about, and really critical for your success. So, in summary, if you think about how to set prices, there are actually different methods about how to set prices in each of these different games. On the left, you have the cost plus approach, you have the elasticity approach in the middle. I'll let you, I think all of you can figure out roughly how these icons mean something that has a framework that connects to a set of numbers that gives you a price. Where I want to go from there is a discussion about what market characteristics will drive a business to be in one of these games or the other. The first criteria is the level of differentiation. Is your product completely commoditized with no differentiation, or is your product quite differentiated with different products and differentiated versus your competition? That's the first criteria. The second criteria is the concentration of your competitors. Are you in a market with a fragmented set of competitors, all competing for the same volume, or is there 3 or 4 or 5 competitors, all of them with similar size, or is there one big leader? These are different market situations that will drive you to different games. And finally, in addition to the competitor set, you have, of course, the customer base. And whether the customer base is concentrated or fragmented, you're going to have different situations. So that's already 3 different dimensions, each with 2 to 3 different positions. That gives you quite a diversity of potential situations. We summarize them in the following graph. We think that the value game is one that is played where you have a very differentiated product, the diamond here, where you have usually very few competitors but one main leader that has the better value proposition, and you have a lot of different customers. The elasticity game is going to be one where you have uniform prices, where everybody pays the same price, and you're going to have a relatively fragmented set of customers and not too many competitors, but also not just 1, 2, or 3 competitors. If you have very few competitors, you are in a game where elasticity doesn't matter because you could start following what every competitor is doing and price through every one of the competitors. When you get to 10 to 12 competitors and you have 10 products to look at, and you look at that in every different market, it starts to be really difficult to do any game theory, and you look at elasticity and you assume the market is quite constant. So that's the elasticity game. That's the uniform pricing game. The cost plus game is usually one that, as I described earlier, where you have very powerful customers and a lot of different competitors. It's in many ways the opposite to the value game. And so while we all know that it would be great to move from a cost plus game to a value game, and we advise anybody who asked us that you should try to not price cost plus, I'm trying to highlight here that there are situations where a company might not have choice but to play the cost game and to play it well. The game theory, I talked about it earlier before. It's the situation where you have very concentrated customers and very concentrated competitors. And that's when you can apply the game theory framework. And that's a place where usually the competitors, where the customers that face different competitors will ask the competitors to meet some standards so that they can switch from one competitor to the next. They will have enough firepower to move the volume from one competitor to the next. They know they need to do this because otherwise they're going to be stuck in the value game, and they won't be able to have control over the prices at which they want to buy the products. So the power game, we call it power game because the outcome of that game depends on the relative power between customers and competitors, but also between the small differentiations that you can have between each of the competitors. And so the relative power in your market, both versus your competitor and versus your customer, determines the outcome of pricing. Very different from the elasticity game. The custom game is the place where you customize all your deal, typical B2B. You do deal by deal. You need to match the competitors. It's the world where sales tend to think that they should determine prices. And we talked about sometimes you don't need to leave them without any control. But that's the name of the game is to really be able to meet every single deal. Very different pricing model from the elasticity game that you have on the top. The choice game is one where you use behavioral science to find and guide your customers to buy the right thing. Suppose all of you know the famous example about why is there a $2,000 bottle at a restaurant at a high end, especially because nobody buys the $2,000 bottle. Well, it's there in order to get people to feel good buying the $1,400 bottle, right? And if you don't have the $2,000 bottle, then nobody buys, and you start at $1,400, then people start, the most expensive bottle they would want to buy is the $1,000 bottle, right? So framing the choice set of your customers is really a good way when you have the ability to do that, to guide your customers to the right outcome for them and for you. This usually happens when you have a relatively concentrated set of competitors that can really help frame the choices. It's not free-for-all all the time. And you have a fragmented set of customers, so you can guide the choice of many customers, not just 1, 2, or 3, where you would be in the orange power game. And the dynamic game is one that you could play when you go from any of the other games. If you could add more information and have live, if you can have data about prices, about costs, about your competitors at any point in time and about the demand, then you can play the dynamic game. It's a twisty Rubik's Cube I put in there to say it's quite complicated, goes up and down in many different ways. But it's, again, a very different game. So how does changing the game reshape markets? Let me give you a few examples about how things evolve over time, and then we'll talk about where to go and how we can shape society. The introduction of the MP3 players changed the way music happened, but the way it started was a very typical elasticity game. A number of competitors launched a number of products. They were all around $100. They were not all identical. Some products were better than others, so you had some below $100, some above $100. And then Apple came out with the iPod. What's the difference between an iPod and an MP3 player? Well, the main difference is the iPod has a little hard disk drive in it. And this 1.5-inch hard disk drives cost roughly $40. So imagine if you're a product manager and your competition is around $100 and you know your cost is $40 more than your competition. Where do you price it? And where do you price it if your boss says, I want you to take over the entire market in the next 3 years and make all of these MP3 players completely obsolete? Do you price it at $100 plus 40? That means you would have a lower margin than the other competitors. Do you go with a similar margin in the market and you price around $180 to $200? Or do you price it higher? Does anybody remember what Apple did? Where they started? At $400. And with $400, they took over the entire market. Just this could be a lesson for all of us. Remember that when your product manager has the incentives to sort of price things so that the market is going to take the price, if you reframe the value proposition and you play the value game, you can actually price much higher and imagine things that were completely imaginable. But Apple did a number of things to make this value proposition work out. iTunes was free, and they made downloading music legally completely possible, and they expanded the market from everybody who was between 16 and 22 and knew how to use Napster to the entire market of people who like to listen to music and wanted to have it digitally. They made the number of songs you could listen to from 20 to 400, and they made them really easy to be bought. And they did that by forcing the labels to unbundle the album and price it at $1 per song. So completely change the pricing model and make it a really low price for the content, but getting paid on the device themselves. That's how Apple took over that market with a pricing to value game playbook. Now, of course, over time, they went to expand the lineup, and there is a number of products that they introduced that is typical of the choice game when they let people choices, and that's how they then got the market to be even bigger and dominated that market. That playbook is, by the way, the same playbook that they applied 8 years later with the iPhone. So here's another story about the automotive industry. How did the auto start? It started with the Model T Ford, really. The Model T Ford is actually the car that has sold the most units since the beginning of the car history, more than the Volkswagen Beetle. Incredible. It was the same car produced between 1908 and I believe 1923, 1924. Every year, the car was changed one way, but Mr. Ford was very famous to say, you could have any color you want, as long as it's black. And the main thing he did in his production facilities and inventing with Taylor the production line was also to pay his people more than the average so that they could afford the car. It was a very different mindset, which was to produce the cars at the lowest cost possible and do this while also paying its workers enough so they can buy themselves a car. That was that's how cars became more available to everybody and more universally available. But of course, this was not the end of the game. And GM came around. And I'm simplifying here with a set of cars that were completely customized. And you could have any color you want. And you could have a lot of different options. And you had the proliferation of brands and the proliferation of products that lasted for a while until a number of competitors, and I'm simplifying again, but if you think about the game that the Japanese players have played, Toyota being one of them, it was a simpler lineup, not as many choices, but choices that were clearly laid out for the customers that were in the choice game. Now it seemed like that was the end of the game and everybody would play the car game this way, except that when Elon Musk started to think about how to build an electric vehicle, he didn't take a Toyota and add some batteries to it. He redesigned completely the vehicle. And he didn't price it at essentially the price of the Toyota plus the cost of the batteries. He priced it at $100,000 and more. And he played the value game there, and he took over the market from the EV standpoint. And what is he doing now? Whether you agree with what he's doing with Twitter and X, I won't comment on that one. But what he's been doing in the car industry is because he doesn't have any dealers, Tesla has the ability to change the prices of the cars in a dynamic way. And they actually have changed the prices of the cars more than 12 times in the past 12 months, when the only way to change the prices of cars for OEM manufacturers is to go through dealers that each of them does whatever they want and reacts differently depending on competition. That gives them an advantage to play a game very differently from the traditional OEMs can be playing. So that's another example about how an industry evolves over time, which means industries are not statically positioned in one single game. They move from one game to the other. And each time you move to a new game, you have an opportunity to really succeed in the marketplace in a completely new way. So what I'd like to illustrate today and finish is an example about how by understanding really the games and how they can be changed, you can reshape society. One of the things that we are all talking about at different levels is global warming and the fact that it would be great to manage climate change in a better way and, if possible, get lower than 1.5 degrees Celsius of warming. Now, while most of the consumers are really concerned about sustainability and climate change, in practice, most of them don't really change their behavior, and there's only 3 to 5 to 10%, depending on categories, that buy a more expensive green product. But if we want to change the world, we're going to need to, for every category, move to greener products and CO2-free emissions and net zero. And when you look at that chart, it's quite depressing. Now, when you ask Bill Gates, he says the most important thing to do is we need to lower the cost premium of green products. And while I have a lot of respect for Microsoft and for Bill Gates, I would say he's missing a big angle. He's missing the pricing angle. If we price differently, we can guide customers to buy green products. But when you see here that the willingness to pay is below the cost, except for the far segments on the left, it seems really impossible. So how do we do that? Well, we do that by understanding deeply segments and segmenting them. When you look per category and across geographies, you have people willing to pay quite a bit of premium and more than what they are paying today. But they're not paying it today because the products are not available at the high premium that they would be willing to pay, and the products have not been redesigned to be the way they could be. The reality is, if you segment the markets and you offer them, you use the playbook that Tesla used, you could price more than 50% for 5 or 7% of your customers. The premium can be much higher, but then you need a completely redesigned product, completely green, completely sustainable, with recyclability across the board. And it might cost you 30% more, but you can charge 50%, sometimes 100% more. There's many examples of people doing like this. There's a segment of customers that are about sustainability first, and they will pay enormous premium. It's our role as pricers to convince our companies and our product managers that they should have the guts to charge and design products and then charge for them at a much higher premium that people imagine today, the same way Apple or Tesla has been doing. Then there is a second segment that we call green concerns. And the green concern are people who are not focused only on the green, but green is important for them. And in that category, you could find people that have concerns and needs that are correlated with green. They could be around health, they can be around saving water, they can be around a lot of attributes that are essentially correlated with the needs of saving the environment in general and doing the right thing. These customers are willing to pay up to 20% more, sometimes 25% more, and they represent above 25% of the population. And so if you sum these two groups, you can already have up to 25 to 30% category by category, and we tested this across geographies and across a number of categories. You can find customer segments that are really willing to pay more. And then you have the green conscious people. They don't have that much more money, but they're still willing to pay the 3 to 5% that we saw before for a product that is well designed. Then you have a set of people that are green neutral and they don't really care and they wouldn't pay any premium. But if you sum up the first 3 segments on the left, you can actually have more than 50% of the market that can buy green products. Once you have 50% of the market that is able to buy green, you could get the entire supply chain organized about delivering, whether it is green steel or green aluminum or green cement or a lot of products like this, because you get it to be paid by the left side of the demand curve. And once it's paid by the left side of the demand curve, you can then offer it for free for all of the others. Now, the differentiation on the left needs to come from more than the green, which is why I talked about how the products on the left need to have more than just their pure green or their net zero. But once you do that, you can then offer and get the entire lineup green. If we do this across category and across geographies, we can really play our part as pricers in saving the planet. The outcome you can get to is that the average willingness to pay across all of these segments, the white line, is now above the red line. And if it's above the red line, it can be profitable, and everybody can do this. And you don't need to change the cost to do this. Now, if simultaneously we do this and we do efforts to re-engineer supply chains and we can also change the cost and get them down, this will make the change even faster, and it will be great. But as pricers, our role is to try to do this, and I just wanted to encourage you all to think through in each of your categories, in each of your product, how can you apply this segmentation approach in order to change the game for how green products are priced. Overall, that's a complete change in mindset. If you think about how Bill Gates is thinking, he thinks costs is the only thing that matters for price. We in this room all know that is pretty far from being true. Otherwise, we would not have a business. We would not have a job. What matters here is understanding value, understanding competition, shaping it, and playing the green game on the bottom right is a way to reframe the situation and to really price differently and to change society in addition to reshaping our business and reshaping our markets. So in summary, I wanted to share this framework. It shows that there are different pricing games. We all know pricing is different in different places. I hope it's a framework that could be useful. I think for many people who think about price as cost, including economists, thinking about solutions that could move everybody from the upper left to the bottom right of the hexagon can really help us in many different situations. The green aspect is just one of them. And I hope with these discussions you have a sense about why I had this over-promising video. I was saying that if we understand the games, we can really not only change our business, but change the world. Thank you very much.
Excellent. Thank you very much, sir. All right, we have time for one question for Jean-Manuel Izaret. Please raise your hand and wait for a microphone.
Actually, it's going to be more than a question. It's going to be a statement or even an invitation for the room, or for the profession, I would say, very modestly. I think that what you provided today and the work you have been accumulating over the years, since your Shell years, is a great piece of insight and thought leadership and consolidation and simplification, to some extent, of that complexity, of that first page where and you could have consulting firms, software vendors, directors of pricing moving from company to company and having to face all those complex situations and, frankly, almost never cover all the situations. So I think that you're doing a great piece, and my invitation is for basically the whole profession to almost adopt your framework. A little bit that in the past, Gartner would have that influence in streamlining and organizing the offerings of consultants or software vendors. I think that as a competitor myself, I'm not an employee of BCG. I really think that rigorous work behind the scenes that you have done covers most bases. It might not be 100% applicable, but it does cover the 80-20 rule. And it allows all vendors, all consultants, and all directors of pricing making the case internally, at least to choose the right methods and the right situations and not waste time on elasticity for the wrong project. Or even at PPS, for example, to maybe stop preaching value-based pricing for all situations. I'm not saying that's the case, but we have to know how. So every time we put something forward as consultants, as vendors, we should be, I think, aware and compatible with what you provided. Anyway, it's just an invitation as a peer-to-peer. Okay. But congratulations, your work is really well worth for the whole profession. And I think we can all build on it now.
Well, thank you for the very kind words. Humbly, I would just say that this is a bit the idea. You may notice that we didn't call this the BCG Strategic Hexagon, but we call this the Strategic Pricing Hexagon. I believe the ideas here are based on the ideas that many of you and all the founders of the pricing discipline have built up. The three lenses of cost, value, and competition. They're very well known. Everybody has thought about this, and also it's just a way to organize a number of things. And if that helps you, and it's been helping us in having a number of conversations, we try to give here a vocabulary that helps simplify things. Please feel free to use the framework. There's nothing proprietary about this. And as a sign of this, we're going to have the books arriving this afternoon. And so for today and tomorrow, and PPS participants only, the book will be free available at our booth and at the bookstore. Thank you very much.
That's great. Oh, nice. Thank you very much. That's great. This is for you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.